are talking Dark Harvest. Now there's actually been a few films called Dark Harvest. This one we're talking about is from 2004, directed and written by Paul Moore, and was the first in a trilogy of kind of killer Scarecrow movies. So Dark Harvest is a movie that I bought on Region 1 DVD like years ago, but never actually got round to watching until right now. So it follows a somewhat kind of typical template, you might say, for a kind of Scarecrow slasher type horror film. We have this young guy who was adopted, and he learns that his blood relatives have passed away and have left him this particular kind of farmland. Now we learn in an intro that in the 1930s there was some shenanigans going on, you might say. This particular farmer seemed to be able to grow his crops whilst no one else could during this kind of drought, and this is the farm that this guy has now inherited. So not really knowing anything about his biological family, this guy with a few friends goes to this farm to check it out. He's warned off, of course, by the locals, saying that it's, you know, has this dark history, etc. But inevitably they come victim when these scarecrows come to life and want to destroy all of the relatives that are still remaining from this particular original kind of farmer. Now what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss Dark Harvest. Okay, so I'm a big fan of scarecrows as a kind of horror movie antagonist. To this day, the 1988 movie simply called Scarecrows is still one of my favourite horror films, and I think is extraordinarily good in regards to building up a sort of creepy atmosphere. And to my money, no other kind of Scarecrow related property has kind of come close to that. So how does this one do? Well, you know, it is a low budget kind of movie, as they all somewhat tend to be fair to them. What can we say that works in the positive column? I will say I think our central character, this guy who has inherited the farm, actually seems like a quite likeable and somewhat competent kind of like protagonist. You know, he actually kind of somewhat listens to the sort of the advice given to him by people he meets in regards to warning him off the land, and actually tries to kind of move his friends off this area before it's kind of too late. He actually tries to come up with different kind of plans and stuff to try and you know, fight off these scarecrows once they sort of become a kind of threat. So I actually could have quite liked him, to be honest. I think he was quite good, and you know, his kind of friends describe him as kind of not a lot of fun, but he's like a good friend. But I thought he came across as somewhat kind of a likeable sort of character, to be honest with you. If you like a lot of nubile flesh, there's plenty of naked women, full frontal naked women in this movie, in this kind of particular sort of skinny dipping scene. There are a couple of kind of like reasonable kind of gore shots, practical effects here, with intestines kind of hanging out and things like this. It has also a pretty atmospheric intro. We see this kind of all these newspaper clippings in regards to this kind of like drought that has happened, and it's devastating people, and kind of, you know, all these kind of farms are kind of going bankrupt because they can't produce anything. And then we have this kind of this one guy who seems to somehow be able to produce kind of crops. So I thought the setup with that kind of intro was pretty solid, to be honest with you. And, you know, it very much plays like you think it's going to play out. If you like just a no frills, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's teenagers or young adults running away from dudes in masks, or this, you know, we're meant to believe they're scarecrows, but, you know, getting picked off one by one in sort of gruesome fashion. I present to you Dark Harvest from 2004. So yeah, it pretty much plays exactly like you're going to think. So let's talk about what I think doesn't work. There's two major areas for me where I think this movie really lacks. The first one being the acting. Unfortunately, I got to be honest with you, I think the acting is not good in this movie. There are a couple of characters who I think do a slightly better job. The lead guy, for example, but the majority of his friends, I think, do quite a kind of a poor job. I feel some of this is down to the direction, to be honest with you. I feel like maybe the actors weren't directed well enough, but whatever the reason, the kind of performances on screen that feel very kind of hokey, very kind of unnatural. That you'll get that kind of like sometimes where people that kind of like it's a wider shot, and we have these people sort of standing around not really knowing what to do with their arms and things like that. It's something I've noticed a few times in films. Just kind of like just kind of a little bit awkward sort of acting from time to time. The second thing I think is the kind of major issue for me is the actual scarecrows themselves. I mean, they literally just look like dudes with rubber masks on. That is it. I mean, they're not really presented to be particularly kind of scary or atmospheric. And again, I'll refer to the 1988 movie Scarecrows, and even things like Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. There's a certain menace and sort of like foreboding nature of this thing that is just kind of like sat up in the middle of a cornfield, kind of like in the visage of a kind of a human being kind of coming to life. But these, it's just like it looks like dudes in rubber masks, but it's also coupled with the way that they move, because they just move like a regular kind of human. Now, I think if you're a kind of a zombie-like kind of construct, or however you imagine this kind of like, scarecrow being to kind of come alive, I don't imagine it runs around and kind of like a regular kind of human. It would at least have some type of unnatural or kind of like zombie-like sort of way that it kind of moves around, because obviously if it's one that's got a body in it, the flesh is decomposed, it's stiff and bones and things, or if it's hay, there's no skeletal structure. So there's no like thought about how these things are going to be moving. So they just look like guys, just in masks. And it really defeats any type of scare factor. They jump out a couple of times, and there's one which is hiding behind in this kind of like bale of hay. I was just like, oh man, there's this big pile of hay, and this usually a scarecrow's crawled in there and is waiting in there. It's just a little silly, and there's no like these things kind of pop up about just after the halfway mark, and you don't really feel like there's much tension that's kind of built up, that there's something unseen in the cornfields and something kind of stalking you, which I think was, so this is why I like the idea of a scarecrow, because I think it can be intrinsically kind of scary if you kind of really think about it. It's just squandered here. It's not the worst example, I have to be honest, but it's like, it's just not as much is done with it as it could have been. So outside of that, I would say like I said, it's a very, very predictable kind of movie. I mean, it doesn't really have any type of originality. It just plays it safe, very much kind of like, we have our plethora of characters, and you know who's going to get killed pretty much, and they get killed in the order that you probably think. And again, it's very much playing from the play it safe kind of playbook. We got the locals kind of warning you off, but they don't they don't get out of there in time, etc, etc. So yeah, absolutely no originality whatsoever, and it's never really like a particularly kind of scary movie. Yeah, it's a 2004 movie, but it's not really. It just plays like very much like a schlocky B movie to a certain degree, and it's filmed in a way. There's some rough edits as well in this movie, I have to be honest. Some kind of like quite kind of abrasive transitions into the kind of the next sort of sequence and everything. So. Yeah, it's not a great movie, I have to be honest. It's probably, for me, I mean, this movie gets quite low scores. I don't think it's terrible. It's just not particularly it doesn't stand out in any way, and it is let down by, as I say, poor acting and the kind of the scarecrows being a bit of a wasted opportunity. But it very much plays out like a typical kind of slasher movie from, like the straight to DVD and stuff like that. That doesn't try to do anything different with the genre. But it's not terribly put together. There are, you know, it's kind of watchable to a certain degree. I'll give it a 3 out of 10, and I thought maybe, you know, maybe I could push it up to a 4, but I don't want to get it that close to kind of being like an average film. So for me, it's a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to next time. Bye for now.